Winter's Day when I first tasted Kirkwall Bay, the first whisky in my 2018 Winter Whisky collection. Hello, I'm Rosemary and thank you for watching. So, Kirkwall Bay, there is no Kirkwall Bay distillery. This is a regional edition from Morrison and Mackay, and it's their Orkney whisky. And it's very pale in colour, as you can see, which instantly tells me that this is probably all about American oak. And I have to say that the nose really confirms this. Now, when I'm choosing the whiskies for a collection like this, I try and think about the food that I'll be eating in the winter and what whiskies might go with that, because I'm really interested in matching seasonal whiskies to my seasonal food. So I'm looking at comfort food and therefore whiskies that are going to be full of flavour and character and that will stand up to my winter cooking. So the nose on this Kirkwall Bay is, well, it's like living here on Orkney. It's fresh, slightly salty. It's a little bit fruity, but not overly so. And it's very interesting. It's definitely fresh, rather like the weather outside today. Might look sunny in my kitchen, but I tell you, I thought about filming outside, and then I decided not to. So this is 46% ABV, as I say, the Kirkwall Bay single malt Scotch whisky from Morrison and Mackay. So it's all from one distillery. You know that from the fact that it's a single malt. And I did read somewhere on the internet that it's on the A961, this distillery, just as you leave Kirkwall. So that, I'm afraid, rules out Scapa and puts it firmly back with Highland Park. And a lot of Highland Parks are more about sherry casks than American oak, although of course both are used in the distillery, or at the distillery. And this, I think this is probably a barrel that was sold to Morrison and Mackay, you know, single. And gosh. Now, slightly salty, that trademark little finish of peatiness that you get from Highland Park, because it's, you know, 20% peated malt that they use. Really fresh, lovely salty notes on the tongue, on the palate, but so warming, so warming. And you can imagine if you've been outside on a winter's day, this would be an absolutely lovely whisky to come into at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's quite dry, which comes through from the oak, although there is a sweetness to it. And it would be like coming in to a really nice, now if I say sherry, you'll say that's crazy because you're going on about American oak. But it has that dry aperitif sort of feel to it. Think Glenfiddich, and then put a bit more guts and being outside in the extremes of weather, and you'll kind of know where I'm going. So 46%, and it's an absolute belter. Now, I've got a little bit of beetroot hummus here. I'll put the recipe on my website in case you're interested. Beetroot hummus might be a little bit off the wall, but it's got walnuts and French mustard in it, so it's quite zingy and slightly sweet. Let me tell you, dear viewer, that is sensational together. It's, you know, if you're having canapes or tapasy type meal, then that is a whisky that would go with it beautifully. But it is warming and delicious. So that's the first whisky in my 2018 Winter Whisky collection, Kirkwall Bay single malt. Now, we've remarked upon the fact that that is very pale in colour, and my second whisky is from Jura. Now, I haven't used Jura whiskies an awful lot, but I've just read Ian Buxton's amazing book, Whiskies Galore, and I'll talk to you on a separate video about that. But this is one that he flagged up. It's the 16-year-old Durac's Own. And Durac is a name for somebody who lives on Jura, of whom there are very few. I believe only about 200. But just look at the difference between the whiskey in those two bottles. Extraordinary. Now, if you like, out of my winter whiskey collection, this Jura is the bad boy. Not that I'm saying it's a bad whiskey. I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination. I wouldn't be telling you about it if it was. But all the whiskies produced by all the companies within White Mackay and then the people who own them do not protest to be, as far as I know, natural colour or non-chill filtered. So I'm not saying that colouring the whiskey is per se a bad thing, but if you're the sort of person who wants to go a bit on the colour, you might think, "Ooh, this has been around, this has been, this is really got all that colour from wood management." That is not true in this case. And coming from the food industry, I really think that they should have to put that there is colouring used in the whiskey on the labels. But there we are, rant over. Because on the nose, this is all about sweet toffee, and again a little bit of saltiness. Very interesting, very comforting. This is in front of the fire once you've got the crumpets toasting. Not once you've got a bit of crumpet in front of the fire, once those crumpets are toasting. Lovely nose, very sweet though. Very sweet after that Kirkwall Bay. And interestingly, much thinner in the mouth as well, but then this is a 40% whiskey, 40% ABV. And the 16 years, perhaps, after a non-age statement, and of course we don't know what's in there, and I would say that there's something of great age and gravitas in there. This whiskey is sweet, it is toffied, and it's definitely a whiskey to go with something like a tarte tatin. Anything that's got that sort of caramelised, toffied outside, or even glazed short ribs of beef or something of that nature where it would really pick out the sweetness. And what's nice about it is that there is this sweetness, but there is the saltiness, which certainly when you live on an island and near the sea, let me tell you, you get a lot of salt. I've never cleaned windows as much as I do now we live here in Orkney. But because of the 40%, it's not as big as it could be, but it is a lovely whiskey, and I think that this is one that, as I say, would also be very good with rich beef casseroles, so long as it doesn't get a little bit lost with that. I think maybe things that are glazed, perhaps maple glazed pork, that sort of thing. But a really nice Jura. Now, the Jura whiskies seem to divide people. Some people say, "Oh, it's not like I remember it." Well, I don't remember it in that way. But I think I have tasted some of the others, the Superstition and things of that nature. This is definitely a step up. It's not a ridiculous price. And if you want to buy a Jura whiskey, I would thoroughly recommend that you buy this one. Just another little taste, just to make sure it fits my winter whiskey collection. And it certainly does. So, very different, the first two whiskies. And for my third whiskey, I'm going back to one of the first distilleries that I visited when I began my whisky travels, and that is Glengoyne. Now, it's just north of Glasgow. It is a Highland whisky, and interestingly enough, the warehouses are one side of the main road and the distillery is the other. And for many years, it was almost sort of classified as a lowland whisky. I think because, now I'm not sure if it's the distillery or the warehouses were on the lowland border. Anyway, it's now classified as a Highland whisky. Glengoyne means the Valley of the Geese, and as a community project, the distillery does support a goose conservation charity, which is always good. So, they as a distillery are very interested in matching whisky with food. And I've gone with the 15-year-old for this collection. You can quite often pick up the 10-year-old, I think in Marks and Spencer's, and that's a lovely dram. But once we get to 15, we're really starting to find a lot more going on in the glass. Now, thinking about whisky as I do, I think about it as either easy, complex or challenging. And definitely our first two, Kirkwall Bay and the Durex Own Choice from Jura, I would say were fairly easy whiskies. This one, on the nose, is much more complex. And there is a touch of exotic fruit about this, and I'm finding more and more these days that I'm getting sort of caramelised pineapple from whisky. And there's hints of it here. A little bit of citrus, but the big thing that comes through here is sherry cask finishing. So again, comforting, warming, drawing me in to a winter whisky. Much more sherry in the mouth. Slightly oily mouth feel. Very satisfying. You can see that I am moving this whisky around my mouth and really quite chewing on it. Lots of lovely sultana notes in the whisky, a bit like bread and butter pudding, or even, dear viewer, lardy cake. Oh, let's not talk food porn. Let's stick with bread and butter pudding. Absolutely lovely. Now, big flavour, 43% alcohol by volume. Remember, this was 46. Perhaps it's not quite as mouth-filling as the Kirkwall Bay, but it's very rounded and heading towards voluptuous. Now, it's sweet, but with lamb casseroles and things like that, I think this would be really, really yummy. And for some reason, I've chosen red foods to go with my tasting. Probably because it's about 2 o'clock and I haven't had lunch yet, I think. So this is summer fruits with some chopped crystallised ginger with it. Lovely match, absolutely lovely match. A little bit of star anise in that, in the fruit, which is bringing out some spice in the Glengoyne and makes it very nice. Now I wonder how that Glengoyne would go with our beetroot hummus. I didn't get my napkin. That's always surprised myself with that. Absolutely lovely, because of course beetroot is sweet, and so that's really picking up on my beetroot hummus. I do hope you're enjoying this, because I am. My next whisky is from the Kintyre Peninsula, from Campbelltown, and this is from Glen Scotia, and it's their Victoriana expression. Now, I am so pleased to have discovered this because when I was in Campbelltown a couple of years ago, and I know a lot of you have watched my video tastings from that time, the actual Glen Scotia that was on offer at that time was in rather a gaudy bottle, and it just put me off completely, although I had tasted 2 or 3 of their expressions and really enjoyed them. But this one, all the whiskies that I've chosen today have come from the Good Spirits Company in Glasgow. And when I was flicking through their website, this one really sort of grabbed my notice. And for one thing, it is the biggest of the whiskies, and I mean the ABV is the highest, 51.5% ABV. But the website was very, very enthusiastic about it, and I have to tell you, I've never had a bad recommendation from the Good Spirits Company. Having said that, I do use other internet suppliers, and they stand me in very good stead as well, like the Whisky Exchange, etc. So I really, really like Campbelltown whiskies, and I was very, very keen to try this one. So Victoriana, from the time when, referencing back to the time when Campbelltown was, just one of the wealthiest places in Europe because it had so many distilleries and their whiskies were so utterly brilliant. And really, honestly, real estate in Campbelltown was, goodness me, eat your heart out Mayfair. It was really up there as valuable property right through Europe because the whiskies were of such astonishing quality. So, I'm so excited. I haven't really told you about the nose, which was full and intriguing and complex and a little bit salty and sweet and delicious. But now in the mouth, this whisky, 50+% ABV, you can imagine it is just coating the whole of my mouth. Huge sherry notes to start off with, and then I'm getting marmalade. Absolutely beautiful citrus notes to it. And this lovely, almost nutmeg in the middle of my mouth, and then wonderful Oloroso sherry notes as well. Rich, rich whisky and warming all the way down. Glorious, glorious. And the nose, the longer it sits in the glass, the more this whisky is going to reveal. I have a new friend who's very, very up in whisky, and we have a little debate going on about when you really form your opinion of a whisky. She's a first sip girl, and as you know, I'm a second sip girl. The second sip on this, it's so abundant in a whole way. And my first sip pulled out all sorts of characteristics as individual tastes. But the flavour of it on the second sip is just rich and satisfying. It's delicious, but I think this is a whisky that I need to add a drop of water to. So here we go, and the eagle-eyed amongst you will realise that we had a little stop to get the water. So just a drop or two, perhaps more than I would usually add, but then, we're over 50% ABV. Certainly the nose is more accessible, and actually, wow, I really, really like that with the water. So, what to try first? A little of my beetroot hummus, perfect as you can imagine, tapasy type things. Now, this is really interesting. This is just like Oloroso sherry. Because it's dry sweet, you might think about it as something to have with sweeter foods. But actually, when you taste an Oloroso sherry with salami or manchego or almonds, it's wonderful. Now for me, the Glen Scotia Victoriana was actually a better whiskey food match with my beetroot hummus than it was with my summer fruits with ginger. So it might be really different for you, dear viewer, but you've just got to try it and see. And as I say, I will put these recipes on my rosemarymoon.com website, and perhaps you might like to just make them up and try them with whiskies you've got at home that you think would be great for winter whiskey drinking. But with regard to my fifth whiskey, I've gone to the Highland Distillery just south of Inverness of Tomartin. And in March last year, 2017, I was very lucky to be at the Five Virtues press launch in Glasgow. And this whiskey is Earth from the Five Virtues range. So they've taken wood, fire, water, etc. Elements that are really involved in the making of whiskey that, you know, are part and parcel of our environment. And this one really stood out for me at that tasting because, for one thing, it's peated, and that is very unusual for Tomartin. They're quite edgy in the way in which they promote their whiskies. They were the first people to suggest that you might drink whiskey and tonic, and their legacy with tonic is a delicious drink. Oh, don't turn off, just hear me out, please, please, please. You know, they have interesting ideas. They have a little model village at the distillery which houses some of their staff, and more importantly for us, as we now run a completely electric car, they also have an electric charging point at the distillery. So good, good, good. What could be bad about them? So this is Tomartin Earth, peated malt, 46% ABV. Well, you've got a picture in your mind, haven't you, dear viewer, as to what you expect. And yes, you could say it's earthy notes, but what is there is peat, which for me often does come across as earthy. I remember reviewing some Paul John whiskies, the great distiller in Goa, and I kept saying they're earthy because I just wasn't thinking peat in Goa, but in fact they were peating the whiskey. So here, Earth is presenting itself as a slightly earthy nose. Fruity as well, perhaps slightly more seaweedy than I would expect them from just south of Inverness. Fruitiness, interesting. Now again, quite a complex whiskey. Licorice, big licorice hit in this, and then that dissolves into the peaty finish, but quite mouth coating, 46%, yes, why wouldn't it be? And toffee apples, soft it is. Absolutely. Toffee apples at the top of your mouth, and then licorice, and then peat. And goodness me, what a winter whiskey this is. Whether it's outside with bonfires or inside with a really rib-sticking beef casserole, is absolutely wonderful on the nose and the palate. I kind of feel I've got to add a little bit of water to this, but I don't really want to. You know, it's one of those sort of whiskies. I'm also keen to try it with my beetroot hummus, because beetroot is quite an earthy vegetable. That sort of means it works. Did you get that impression? That is heavenly. Absolutely heavenly. And how's it going to cope with ginger? Summer fruits, ginger. It's good. It's not perfect. Wow. Now, what really interests me is I've got my Norland glass here, and you might have seen that in previous videos, the one with Kilchoman, 100% Islay. I'm going to add the Victoriana to my Norland glass, which has these amazing sort of fins inside it, and almost does what adding water does to the whiskey. Now, it is a sort of a processed glass, kind of a bit Pyrexy, but other forms of glass cookware are available. It's quite extraordinary what it does to the flavour of whiskey. And it's quite amazing with the Victoriana. It really is delicious. It's like it's been standing for 2 hours. Quite amazing. I'm just going to rinse that round. And add the tomatin earth to it. I have a theory that my winter whiskey collection from last year is my most viewed whiskey video, because I was melting in front of the wood burning stove in our last home, which was a very ancient and beautiful cottage. I do hope you will, everybody who enjoyed that video will enjoy this one just as much. Because it's an equally stunning selection of whiskies. Now, the Norland glass for me with the Victoriana is brilliant. So that just brings into question, does this work best with the high alcohol by volume whiskies? Now, if I go back to Kirkwall Bay, it was on a summer's day when I first saw Kirkwall Bay. 46%. An aperitif whiskey. Hugely opened out since I poured it. Gosh, isn't whiskey wonderful? Thank you for watching, and wherever you are, it's February as I'm filming this. If you're somewhere hot or somewhere cold, keep drinking whiskey, and thank you for watching, and see you next time. Cheers.